Welcome back. 7:41. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Anne and Pip.
Joining us to go through some of the day's headlines is showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci and philosopher Piers Ben. Good morning to you both.
Let's get straight in there, Piers, then, with this terrible story about the desecration of Jewish graves in Belgium.
Yes, this comes from a viral tweet from Sasha Rottiman, who says that 85 graves, including the grave of her great-grandmother, or his great-grandmother, in the Jewish section of Marcinelle Cemetery in Belgium, were desecrated, and with the removal of the Star of David, all aimed at removing and violating Jewish identity. I've had a number of discussions with one or two Jewish friends of mine who are very aware that people think that anti-Semitism is something that was very much alive in the 1930s and is no longer. And indeed, they don't think that most people are anti-Semitic. But it's a weird thing that comes up every now and again, particularly with the politics of Israel. Of course, it is not anti-Semitic per se to object to the policies of Israel, or in my view, even to the existence of Israel. But it's often evidence of anti-Semitism to have these sort of views. It's often below the surface, and it's a strange sort of... It goes back to medieval blood libel myths, weird stories. It goes back, you could argue, to the New Testament with the Jews being accused of deicide, the murder of God. It's something that the Jewish people are particularly aware of, and we should listen to their take on these things.
But for graves to be desecrated,
it's
I mean,
horrible.
how appalling is that?
Yeah. It's like, how sick do you have to be to want, and how much hate do you have to have inside you, and what are you achieving? You know, I think since the war's broken out, I've spoken to many of my Jewish friends who just don't feel safe to go out. One of my friends has just become a shadow of her former self because she says she doesn't feel safe. She doesn't feel proud anymore to say she is Jewish, just in case she's going to be attacked. And I think there is this growing number of anti-Semitic attacks that are happening, which it does feel in a way are being swept underneath the carpet.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Piers, you're right in that Jewish people themselves have been aware of the history of anti-Semitism for, centuries. But I think the rest of us presumed it died with the Second World War. Suddenly to be faced with this, it's like pressing a button and suddenly there's a tidal wave of hate still there. And I'm shocked by that, but maybe I shouldn't be.
I don't think most people are guilty of this hate. I think that anti-Semitism is less prevalent than it was in the 30s. It was quite overt in the 30s. But there's always going to be a small...
Well, it was state-sanctioned.
It was, well, indeed. But, I mean, among the British aristocracy and so on, it was always there. Some of them sympathised with the Nazis. But nevertheless, it's something which is off with some people, some paranoid conspiracist types. It is quite close to the surface. And I think the Jewish people are quite understandably more sensitive to this because they're likely to be the victims of it, whereas other people, if you're not Jewish, you're not going to notice anti-Semitism.
No, right.
And I think you made the point, Piers, as well, that there is a difference between the Israeli government policies and the Israeli people.
Yes. Well, indeed, there are many Israeli Jews who are quite progressive. They don't like the policies of Netanyahu. I've even met one Israeli Jew, or somebody who's in the Israeli army, who was against the existence of Israel for purely political reasons. But even so, anti-Semitism is a strange poison lurking below the minds of, unfortunately, a small...
Well, I hope there was CCTV somewhere near that grave, and that maybe the people who did it will be caught. Steph, looking at Hugh Edwards.
Yeah.
Well, it's all been very quiet for a long time, but obviously the BBC has been conducting an investigation into his behaviour.
Well, definitely it was one of the scandals that rocked the media industry and the nation because Hugh Edwards was such the major face of the BBC, and once that scandal did break, since then he got treated in hospital to help his mental health. So I knew that he's going to have to come back fighting, as his wife Vicky said in the statement when she did release that it was him that was at the centre of the scandal. But now it's been said that he is set to leave the BBC. The BBC are not commenting on it because they don't want to speculate. But I can imagine for Hugh Edwards now having such a glittering career where he's, you know, led the nation through things such as the Queen's death. How do you come back from such a scandal and still be that face of authority and respect for...
And we should stress that there has been no criminal prosecution.
There's been no
he
criminal
denies any criminal wrongdoing.
He does. And I think this is where the fight is going to have to be for Hugh, because I can imagine he didn't want his career to end like this. And there's going to be many questions in terms of how the Sun handled the scandal. Was it of the public's interest for us to know what was going on in his personal life? There'll be questions now about the BBC. How did they handle this situation? Maybe they were doing the investigations because the Sun brought out the story because the victims' parents were saying that the BBC weren't investigating it, and maybe they were. So
it's better say alleged victim as well.
Yeah, alleged.
Because there's no doubt there was a young man who was contacted, but whether or not he was a victim, maybe we will never know. But the BBC have clearly done their own investigation. They've presented him with the conclusions of their investigation, and I don't know whether both sides are agreeing, but he will leave.
And that leaves the BBC with a big problem. You know, Hugh Edwards, the face of election coverage, which might only be a few months away. Who steps into his shoes?
Yes, it was fairly clear when the story broke in July that whatever the background truth, his career was sadly almost certainly at an end. That was fairly clear to me at the time.
I think if you want to be, and you are the face of something as important as BBC News, if you are the face of it, the embodiment, as you said, for all of those great big public events, the slightest smear against your name is going to just spoil everything.
Yeah, because I think even though he does have the defence where he hasn't done anything illegal, it's more the question of moral standings and moral grounds. When you are a public figure, and, you know, we see it all the time now.
It's like you say, though, who would replace him?
Anne?
I've got so many stains against my name. Right, we'll move on very quickly, Piers, to in an interview with The Guardian, Joan Bakewell, now there's a character, has been speaking out about life as a solo lady.
Indeed, I follow Joan Bakewell. I love her interviews. She's...
Thinking man's crumpet.
Well, that's what they said about in the
60s
when she was the presenter of Late Night Lineup. Not that I was a small child, so I didn't watch this stuff, but my mother did. And she was, you know, she had a very high profile in the media at that time. And she's now over 90, which is hard to believe. And I've listened to her podcasts on humanism. And she's talking about being single. This is actually part of a long piece in the Saturday Review of The Guardian about being single. It's interviews with a number of women.
Has she always been single, or has she been...
No, she's been, I think, she's married... I think she's married twice and widowed once, I think. And I don't want to get this wrong, but she says, I'm now in my 90s with the experience of 2 marriages behind me, so I'm not looking to raise children, create a family home, etc., etc. She talks about the freedom of being single. And a number of the other writers before her, who are a lot younger, say the same thing. It's a very interesting question, because when you make a life choice, like, do I get together with somebody with the intention of permanence or don't I? You never quite know what's going to happen.
No.
And, you know, if you are single, you might well be jealous of people who appear to be in loving relationships and they have somebody to embrace. At the same time, some people, as Joan Bakewell says herself, will say there's nothing lonelier than being in the wrong relationship, being locked in a relationship that has become jaded and worse. The thing is, you just don't know. Some people, I think, are just not suited to lifelong commitment. Most people, I think, do seek it. Some don't find it. Some find the wrong person. Some make dreadful mistakes. Some regret for many years being with the wrong person. So it's an existential question that she's put her finger on. But she seems to have had the best of all worlds. She has been married. She's now...
I can imagine she's got tons of friends.
Tons of friends. Just
interesting friends.
All these media people, yes. And she talks about, there's a question of loneliness, isolation, late night tears into the pillow. She doesn't actually say about herself.
But there's such a difference, isn't there, Stephanie, between being alone and feeling lonely.
Yes.
Totally. And I think, you know, there is this thing where you can feel lonely as a single person. And I think, you know, there is, you know, the downsides of that, which I don't think single people run away from. But I think being alone now has been seen as an empowering thing. If anything, singlehood has become much more glamorous for young women, older women who have been married, and they enjoy that freedom and that independence, where I think for a lot of younger women before, you used to be, you know, considered a spinster if you weren't going to find the man of your dreams. But now, actually, you can still build a life that is happily on your own, but you still do need to face those consequences.
Well, I tell you what, as somebody who's been, I've been single now for a very long time, but at the very beginning of it, for the first 5 or maybe even 10 years, every time I did an interview with the media, the first question was, have you got somebody in your life now? You know, why? And if not, why not? So there's something wrong with you for wanting to... Thank you very much, I'm fine on my own.
But it's like the age-old question about having children. If you haven't got children by a certain age...
And we're getting to the worst time for it. Christmas is the worst time as a singleton because then you're at the table and people are like, have you found someone again? It's like the same question every year.
If you go to a wedding, you see all these apparently in love couples at the right sort of age, and you might think, well, you know, wouldn't it be nice? But I think the worst thing really is to be with the wrong person. Maybe the best thing is to be with the right person. Somewhere in the middle, perhaps, is to be.
Somewhere in the middle.
If only it were that easy.
Yes. This is one for you at home, please. Let us know. Do you live life as a singleton? Is that a good thing for you, or are you lonely? What's the difference? GBViews@gbnews.com. Tell us your story.